Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films. Welcome to another random review. I almost forgot what I was doing here. Today's random review is from 1980 and it's Attack Force Z or Attack Force Z, directed by Tim Burstall, was a kind of journeyman Australian director, more character-driven films. But he was the replacement of Philip Noyce, who was fired after a disagreement with the producers over an extra, apparently. And this stars Mel Gibson, Sam Neill, and John Philip Law. This is a film that I saw a long time ago. Always had a soft spot for it because of its brutality and bleakness. And I think earlier in the year, Severin released it in Blu-ray with the usual nice black case that Severin does. This is multi-region, and it has the Z-Men Debriefed, which is a lovely little piece with executive producer John McCallum and actors John Waters and Chris Haywood. Unfortunately not Sam Neill and Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson had made Gallipoli at this point. He'd made Mad Max, but it wasn't out yet. And Sam Neill he's a bit more experienced, but again made kind of smaller character pieces. But you can tell in the film that both of them are going to be stars. It's not the kind of film that we kind of equate Sam Neill with. But obviously Mel Gibson did a few action films in his time, and you can just tell he was going to be a star with that face. So this is based on a true story. The attack, or Force Z, did actually exist. A group of Australian soldiers. Sometimes they would have other nationalities in their units. I mean, John Philip Law is playing a Dutch soldier, believe it or not, or his parents were Dutch. John Philip Law, who according to the documentary was always worried about his hair, which is not really that surprising. And there's a wonderful script that we read at the start of the film from somebody in the military, the Australian military, about Force Z and the number of missions they went on in the Pacific during World War II, including a really famous one where all of them get killed. And this is kind of based on one of those missions, sort of. They appear on this island to try and find the survivors of a plane crash, and are met with Japanese resistance and befriend some Chinese people to help them out. This was a co-production with Taiwan, so there's a really famous Taiwanese actor who actually died, I think, fairly recently. There's also a female actor from Hong Kong who was filming another film at the same time, so she kept going from, it was filmed in Taiwan, so she kept bouncing back from Taiwan and Hong Kong. And the thing, as I said, I remember about this film is the brutality and the bleakness. You can make up your mind at the end of the film whether the mission was a success or not. Within 5 minutes, something fairly dramatic happens, which gives the audience a view of, hang on a second, anything could happen in the next 90 minutes. People that perhaps you don't think will be killed are killed. Women are tortured, children are threatened with dismemberment. And the action is very meat and potatoes. There's no glorification of war in the film. There's no jingoism. There's no flag waving. The kinds of things that are kind of feature in quite a lot of war films. When the characters in this kill people, you do kind of see the reaction in their face. It's not a pleasant job, but it is a job. Civilians are killed. It doesn't skirt around the brutality, especially in the Pacific arena of war, as they like to call it, or the theatre of war, which has always been such a offensive term. So again, they meet some help along the way that guides them. They obviously meet a lot of resistance, and the question is, will they be able to find the prisoners and escape? There are subtitles as we find out what some of the Chinese and the Japanese are saying. There are moments when those people speak English, but for the most part they are actually subtitled, which is always good. So as I say, Tim Burstall was brought in by the producers at the last second, because the story the producer says in the little kind of documentary is that Philip Noyce argued over an extra pulling along a cow, who's only on the screen for a couple of minutes, but the producers had made an agreement with a local repertory company that they would use some of the actors. Philip Noyce felt that the actor they'd chosen to play an old farmer didn't look like an old farmer enough, and that may have been one of the reasons that they parted ways. But the other angle was Philip Noyce wanted to make it more like an art picture, perhaps, just for example, a bit like Malick's Thin Red Line, which is kind of interesting when you think of some of the films Philip Noyce has made, like Salt with Angelina Jolie, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, Dead Calm with Sam Neill, I think, Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer, Rabbit Proof Fence, The Saint with Val Kilmer. Not what you would consider works of art, perhaps. Obviously, Eye in the Beholder. Obviously, this was 1980. He was in a different place, but he talked about making the film like soldiers climbing up this mountain and make it look like a Chinese painting, which was obviously not what the producers perhaps wanted. They wanted a meat and potatoes actioner, and that's kind of what they've got with Tim Burstall. It's not really artistic in any way. It is pretty much blunt force trauma. John Philip Law obviously has some time for a little romance, but apart from that, the film never stops from them getting on the island to potentially leaving the island. It's just non-stop for an hour and a half, but it never feels rushed. There's moments of tension and torture, and as far as a meat and potatoes actioner, I think it is kind of a little bit underrated, just in the sense of, again, there's no glorification, there's no fetishization of weaponry and things like that quite a lot of war films do have. It is a fairly bleak and brutal look at these kind of operations I mean, obviously, hilariously, there's one point where Mel Gibson is in charge of the crew, or like, the job was to get on the island and be as quiet as possible. And of course, the film has a ridiculously high body count. It's not quite like Schwarzenegger's Commando, even though for some reason on this cover, Mel Gibson does look a little bit like Schwarzenegger in the cover of Predator, and they've just swapped his head. Because at no point does Mel Gibson wear a vest like that. He just wears the green like all the other guys. So I think that might actually be lifted straight from Predator. Obviously the film is very green because there's lots of jungle, but there is a beach at the end. And as I say, this is not a film with stunning cinematography or amazing composition. This is a meat and potatoes war film, very much like Robert Aldridge's Attack. You could almost do a double bill of Attack and Attack vs Z, as far as it's like a Robert Aldridge film, it's like a Sam Fuller film. There's no, as I say, there's no jingoism, there's no aren't we brilliant, aren't we heroes. These are just guys doing a job, and none, some or all of them will make it at the end of the mission. It's just a really enjoyable little film. I think is more interesting than just, it's a really early Mel Gibson, Sam Neill film. There is a little bit more to it, considering it didn't have a huge budget, and considering the director was pretty much thrown in as a replacement for somebody else. Again, we'll never see that vision, but it's just always interesting when producers realise that perhaps the person they hire might have a different vision than they did, and generally the producers win. So thanks very much for watching this random review of Attack vs Z, all the way back from 1980. I know the young whippersnappers in the audience might think that was hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't seem that long ago. And it's a lot of, I wouldn't say fun, but it's a well-paced actioner. It's a bit like Dogs of War. You could watch in a double bill with Dogs of War as well, even though it does lack that Christopher Walken element that a Christopher Walken gives you, or preferably the Christopher Walken gives you. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know what you think of Attack vs Z and what your favourite early Mel Gibson or Sam Neill performance is, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews, because I'm always watching something random. This is Audrey Ronan from Solid Ronan Films, saying farewell.